Hello and welcome to Blytheway Business News, where today I'm joined by Mark Frankcom, who is the Chief Financial Officer of National Milk Records, otherwise known as NMR. NMR you can find listed on the Aquis Exchange in London. Mark, welcome on the show. You've just released some excellent financial results and your annual report. Highlights which jump out, the revenues are up, your earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, amortization, EBITDA increased 65%. You've clearly bounced back from the COVID impact. Run us through the highlights as you see them, though, please.
Thanks, Tim. Yes, I will. Turnover is up year on year. We grew our revenues by 1.5%. And if you exclude one revenue category, which we exited in November this financial year, then actually on a like-for-like basis, they're up 3.5%. And EBITDA, as you say, is up almost £1 million at 2.4 million. That's 65%. And that reflects the fact that we are recovering, as you say, coming out of the pandemic. And also in the comparative year, we had a cyber attack, which dented our financial performance in 2020. But it is good to see those earnings returning to a much better level this year. Net debt also, we managed to reduce in the year. That's down by 25% to just over £1 million and only 0.4 times those earnings. And also we had a record year for investment with our CapEx growing by 7% in the year, up to 1.6 million. So yes, a really good set of financials that we're pleased with.
You mentioned there, Mark, the impact of the pandemic, and it might not be obvious to viewers why it is a company which makes its profits for shareholders by testing the nation's dairy herds of cows. Talk us through how did the pandemic affect National Milk Records? What was the scale of the impact, and how have you managed to bounce back?
Yeah, well, briefly, it's probably worth saying that the dairy supply chain in the UK is a very resilient supply chain, and we're lucky to be part of that for sure. Back in the first lockdown, the services sector basically switched off. So hotels and restaurants, the demand in that sector switched off overnight, and that accounts for about 10% of UK milk production. So the flexibility of our supply chain to cope with that was remarkable at that time. And in fact, less than 1.5% of milk was lost or destroyed for just 2 days in that lockdown, which is worthy of note. NMR also within that story, we were impacted most significantly in our field operations. So a milk recording customer will typically have an NMR technician go to their farm once a month. We'll visit twice to do both milkings in the morning and the evening. And we will collect all of the data for events on the farm and samples. And of course, with the restrictions applied in that lockdown, that was significantly felt by our business in the first lockdown. And that was at the end of the last financial year, starting obviously in April 2020, but also felt in the early months of this financial year. So that did impact us. But it's worthy of note that in the subsequent lockdown, so the second one in roughly September and the third in December 2020, we were much less significantly impacted. And that's a reflection of our learnings in terms of the flexibility that we were able to put in place in our operations. But also the demand from our customer. They realized that having a contiguous set of milk records was really important to them. So a much lesser impact in lockdowns 2 and 3.
If I believe everything I read in the newspapers, which I'm not sure I should, people would have us believe that as a nation we're eating less dairy, consuming less milk, but you've managed to record some very strong growth numbers at that basic level of like the number of cows in the database. So how do you square that circle, Mark? I mean, your business is growing. Talk me through that juxtaposition.
Yeah, and it is interesting, Tim, isn't it? I mean, we report 2 KPIs, particularly in the annual report, and they are number of cows on our database, the number of cows that we are keeping records for, and that's grown by 1.5% in the year compared to where we were last year. And the other one is the average revenue per producer, per milk producer, which is a reflection of the proportion of samples that come into our laboratory that we are testing, and the number of tests that we're doing on that sample. So, and that KPI was up by 8.5% in the year. So, NMR is seeing growth in those KPIs, but also, as you say, UK dairy is in fact growing. The AHDB, which is the Agriculture and Horticulture Development Board, reported that UK retail dairy grew by 10%. In the 12 months to January 21. So, we are seeing growth in dairy. And in fact, UK processors are also investing in their capacity. So people like Arla and Saputo Dairy are investing in their UK operations. So, UK dairy is in a healthy place and is growing. And there's no doubt, is there, that we all notice the growth of milk alternatives in our supermarket shelves. But in terms of the volumes that we're seeing, they aren't significantly impacting the volumes of dairy consumed. And in terms, I'm not sure either how much of a useful alternative they are in terms of solving our sustainability issues. Ploughing up mature pasture land to grow, whether it's almonds or oats, is the wrong answer. Pasture is a carbon sink, and our farmers perform an important role in looking after the carbon sink in their pasture land.
In the week we're having this conversation, Mark, there's lots of stuff on the front page of the newspapers and being debated around supply chains, drivers not being able to deliver food to supermarkets, pigs in blankets not being on our tables at Christmas. NMR, though, I'm assuming has a role not so much in the supply chains, but more in the food safety aspects of all of this. Is that right? I mean, how do you fit into food safety?
Yeah, we do, and provenance. I mean, that's really at the heart of what NMR is doing for UK dairy. And you're right. There's been a lot of talk. Minette Batters, the president of the NFU, has been all over the radio and TV this week, talking about the pork industry. But the same is true for dairy. The production standards in the UK are second to none, and we have very good standards in terms of the production of our food, and we are at the heart of making sure that is the case in dairy. Whether that's measuring the efficiency of milk production, which of course has an impact in terms of maintaining low carbon for its production, or the health of the animal. A healthy cow is a happy cow and a good producer, and that's what we do. We measure health, we measure efficiency, and we measure other things. We measure contaminants, for instance. So whether that is simple as water, or whether it's cleaning agents on farm, or whether it's important to human health in terms of things like antibiotics. So we're right at the heart of assurance in terms of the supply chain for measuring those things.
A few moments ago, Mark, you were saying that the dairy farmers, their pastures are carbon sinks, which does, I suppose, lead us into thinking about sustainability. For the first time in your annual report, you're now looking at the use, the consumption, the production of greenhouse gases. Tell us a little bit about that and what your thinking is.
Yeah, well, we're pleased to have produced that report, and it does have a year-on-year comparison in it, and I encourage readers to go and have a look at that. But also, of course, NMR has, we believe, a role to play in the measurement of greenhouse gas and sustainability, or carbon, in the supply chain. So, if you look at, how to measure the carbon use on farm, then you need to consider the 4 Fs, which are food, fertilizer, fuel, and fertility. And NMR is already right at the heart of measuring the fertility of the animal. But the other 3 factors, fuel is obviously reasonably straightforward to measure, but food and fertilizer, they're about quality. So measuring the quality of your food and the inputs versus outputs of your food is something that NMR can look to get engaged in, whether that's directly or whether it's indirectly with partners, and using data in terms of measuring that efficiency of inputs versus outputs. And for fertilizer, that comes down to soil quality. And again, NMR has technicians on farm. We are looking at the ways that we can perhaps work with partners in that sector of sustainability measurement to help the supply chain measure and understand its carbon impact.
Finally, let me bring you back, Mark. You are the company's finance director, and I know you've announced not just a dividend, but an increased dividend on the back of these results. So I think you've 1.5 pence per share, and you're also saying that with that dividend, you've still got scope to keep investing in the growth of the company. So just talk us through a little around the dividend policy and then the strategy for the allocation of capital.
Well, we're pleased to report a progressive dividend this year. It's up by 1/4 pence on what we paid out last year, and that is the proposal that we're taking to AGM later this month. And it does allow us, as you say, the bandwidth to invest in our growth plan. We have a 3-year plan for growth. That is centered around our core markets and growing those KPIs that we talked about. And the adjacent opportunities to those core markets, whether that is in more testing or testing of data, for example. And one big opportunity that we've invested in during this year, and we're in the pilot phase for testing for, is genocells, which we've talked about in our annual report. And this is a new disruptive technology which NMR has the exclusive license for in the UK, and measures the DNA of the cells in a milk sample. Now, the cells bit is important because essentially that's the cells, the white blood cells in a milk sample are a measure of the cow fighting disease. So they're a measure of infection, and they are a payment parameter. So low cells equals higher payment, and therefore they're a very important thing to measure for farmers. And genocells, by measuring the DNA in those white blood cells in a bulk tank sample, if the farmer has a DNA identity for his whole herd, then he is able to identify the animals shedding the white cells and the DNA into a bulk milk sample. So it's a really light touch way of cells control for a farmer. And NMR, of course, already collects his bulk milk tank sample. So that's a significant opportunity for us. It enables us to go into markets that we've not been in before. It is margin accretive, and it also allows us to create hybrid services for genomic cell counting, but also conventional services such as health testing services and spectral data. So that's a big opportunity, and I think that our strategic vision of the future includes definitely sustainability and the role that NMR can have in that space for the supply chain, and we're determined to look for opportunities to grow our scale in line with our strategic plan.
Mark, thank you for joining us. That was Mark Frankcom, Chief Financial Officer of NMR, National Milk Records, updating us on the NMR role in providing the nation with healthy and safe milk and dairy products, while at the same time generating healthy profits and paying a dividend to its shareholders. That's it from Blytheway Business News for today. Thanks for watching.